They moved me out to sell my home. I sold their future instead. The morning they came for me, my son used that gentle voice he reserves for pets and telemarketers. "It's just for a couple of weeks, Ma. Trial stay. Safer while we get the wiring sorted." He stood in my front room with a clipboard he didn't know how to hold, a man playing foreman in his mother's house. Beside him, my daughter ran her fingers along the mantel like a buyer. Not a child who'd grown in the scent of that mahogany. The daughter-in-law clicked photos of everything. "Inventory," she said, "for insurance. I'm 72. I know how to listen with my eyes." 2 men from the moving company slid my cedar chest onto a dolly. I heard the thin complaint of the wood, as if the chest recognized a stranger's hands. I placed my palm on the lid and kept my face grandmother soft. "Careful with that," I said. "My husband built it the year we married. The lock sticks." "Yes, ma'am," the older mover said. He looked to be near my age, shoulders hexed by a life of lifting. He met my eyes once and nodded. Respectful. The younger one avoided my gaze and whistled low, impatient. My son, his name is Paul, tapped the clipboard. "Harold, you good with the list there?" Harold, the older mover, read the labels I'd put on each box in tidy black pen. Kitchen, copper pans, photos, family albums, office, ledgers. He gave me a small, private half-smile, the kind a man makes when he sees a trick he respects. I had packed those boxes myself, everything square and evenly weighted. Inside the office box, under a stack of blank stationery, I'd nested a recorder no larger than a matchbook and a copy of my signature on crisp white paper, written 10 times in slow strokes to reveal every tremor I did not have. I'd been married to a carpenter for 46 years. You learn structure. Where weight lives, where leverage hides. At the door, my daughter, her name is Emily, stopped to take a photo of the porch swing. "The realtor says curb appeal matters most," she said to her husband's ear, not mine. She'd cut her hair sharp that month. New edges, new appetites. The daughter-in-law, Mara, capped her phone. "Buyers like clean lines. It's just a trial," Paul repeated to me. "They have a nice room open, garden view. You'll like the kitchen." "The kitchen," I said, "is mine." "Mom," he said softly, patting my arm like dough, "you barely cook." I looked past him and counted. 6 paces to the hall, 3 to the coat closet. Stand, pivot, reach up. The attic crawl key was taped to the underside of the shelf, left there by my husband 20 years ago. We'd raised children under that shelf. We'd hid Christmas under it. We'd kissed there once when the turkey burned. The key was still there. The past is not a rumor if you've put your hands on it. "I'll fetch my sweater," I said. "It's chilly." I walked the 6 and 3. In the closet I took the sweater and slid my fingers under the shelf. The key came free with a flake of dry tape. I tucked it into the hem of my sweater. No one noticed. People who take houses forget how houses work. At the facility, Sunny Heights, the sign promised. Mara did the talking. "Temporary," she told the woman at the desk. Her doctor thinks she needs structure. The woman at the desk wore a smile that had watched storms roll through. We give structure, she said, and we listen. Of course, Mara said. The intake nurse asked me my name, my birth date, the year. I answered slow, let the wrong month slip from my mouth, then blinked and corrected. She wrote down both answers. That's what they do. Record both your stumbles and your recovery. I let them see both. They left me with a cheerful schedule and a tall window that looked over a courtyard fig tree. I could smell lemon polish in the hall. My neighbor across the corridor had a sign on his door that read, Frank B., Retired Judge. It was a magnetic placard with a gavel drawn on it in cartoon brown. I nodded at it. I've always believed in omens, not the magic kind, but the practical kind. A decent pair of hands showing up at the right time. That first night, I sat on the bed and wrote a list with a golf pencil on a breakfast napkin. 1. Titles: house, car, small share in Paul's company, engine lift note, find papers. 2. Bank, freeze, large withdrawals, flag weirdkins. 3. Doctor, schedule evaluation with someone who values his license. 4. Cameras, check those I planted, teapot, office clock, front porch light. 5. Lawyer, call Avery, not the family kind, the kind who has dust on her shoes. 6. Witnesses, Harold the mover, Mr. Klein at the bank, anyone who saw. At 7 the next morning, Frank stood in my doorway holding 2 coffees. You're new, he said. Judge Briggs, retired, hard of hearing, good at cards. I'm Mae, I said, and took the coffee. I prefer tea, but I've learned to accept gifts I can use later. Widow, mother, of little comfort at the moment. He took that in, saw the shape. Families get clever when property shines, he said. I've seen it 50 times, and from every angle. They've moved me out to sell my home, I said evenly, not looking for pity. Here I am. He sipped. And what are you? Not done. He smiled into his cup. Talk to your banker first, if they're gearing up to move money. A banker with a spine is your first fence. And don't sign what they hand you, no matter how soft they talk. They've already had me sign something, I said. An inventory release and a medical release. Get copies, he said. Phrase you need. For my records. Say it like a grandmother, not a cop. Are you always like this? I asked. At dawn? Yes, he said. At night, I get sentimental and tell stories about juries. That afternoon, my son came alone with a smile that never reached the eyes. He stood with his hands behind his back the way boys do when they're hiding trouble. Brought you your slippers, Ma, he said, producing them like a magician fumbles doves. And something to sign. Facility needs it. He held out a consent form. The logo wasn't the facilities, and the grammar was wrong in 2 places. Someone had typed it without understanding where commas belong. I put on my glasses and tisked. "My eyes," I said, squinting, "are not what they were." "Just a simple consent to share medical records," he said. "Boring, I know." "I'm boring, too," I said. I took the pen and wrote my name as I always do, the way my husband loved because it curls at the end. But I did it on a separate slip of paper and slid his form back blank. "Practicing," I said, fluttering the signed note. "My hand shakes when I'm nervous." He laughed, the kind of laugh men use when they want to be done with a topic. He pocketed the practice signature like he was stealing a candy. I said nothing. Thieves take what you leave on the table, even if what you left is bait. When he left, I went to the nurse's station and asked for copies of everything in my file. I said the words Frank taught me. For my records. They gave me a stack. That night, when the hall quieted, I used the phone hidden under the nightstand, courtesy of a soft-spoken orderly, and called two people I'd been saving for this day, Mr. Klein at the bank and Avery Hale, attorney at law. Klein answered in the voice of every honest banker I've ever known, grave and fatherly. "Mae, tell me you're calling to say that son of yours doesn't have your debit card." "He has access to too much," I said. "It stops tonight." "Then we do 3 things," he said. 1, set transaction alerts on anything over $500. 2, put a hold on wire activity until I hear from you in person with the password I'm about to give you. 3, freeze the online profile for 48 hours. He'll think the site's broken. I'll be the villain. I'm old enough to enjoy it." "What about the accounts you can't see?" I asked. "The certificates, the line of credit I co-signed for Paul's business." He exhaled. "I warned you on that one." "I remember what you said, and I did something you advised with that warning ringing in my ears," I told him. I filed a UCC-1 against the engine lifts and the 2 work trucks. He used them as collateral for the equipment note. The filing's current. Klein made a sound you don't often hear from men who wear ties to work. It was approval without words. "Flag everything," I said, "and watch for drafts from a title company." "You think they'll try to sell," he said, "with or without you." "They're not good with without," I said. "They prefer pretending I'm here. It goes smoother." "Come by," he said. "I'll have the coffee." "I'm gonna be watched," I said. "I'll bring a friend with a name that makes men stand up a little straighter." In the morning, I went down the hall and knocked on Frank's door. He wore a white undershirt and socks to his knees, like every man his age I've ever loved. "You need a ride," he said. "I need a witness," I said, "and someone who knows how to sit still while a storm passes." "I sat still through 3 murder trials," he said, pulling on a tweed jacket with the elbows gone thin. "Bankers used to tremble when I walked in. Klein won't. He's got a spine. But it'll do you good." Klein made good on his promise. We froze. What could be frozen and locked the rest behind passwords my children didn't know. Words from the year I met their father on a church lawn. On the way out, Klein put his palm over mine in the old way that told me he'd done what he could. "They'll press in other places now," he said. "Watch your mail. Watch title records." "Title records?" Frank said. "The judge even in retirement. If someone plans to sell a house they don't own, They can try to create a world where it looks like they do, Klein said. Forged deed? Phony power of attorney. They'll dress it up with a notary who's tired of a small salary. Title companies aren't stupid, but they're overworked. Names, I said. Who signs things in this town? Klein slid a handwritten list across his desk. Notaries I'd let notarize my soul, and one I wouldn't. His name's Brad. He plays poker with the realtors. He's fast with his stamp when the ink smells like fresh commission. On the sidewalk, Frank whistled low. Do you have a lawyer? Avery, I said. She's not the cocktail circuit kind. She's the get dirt under your nails kind. We built wills in a trust when my husband was alive. I kept them tidy after he died. Quietly, last month I also signed a new instrument, an irrevocable trust for the house, set to spring at my written election. The election's in an envelope in my cedar chest, the one with the lock that sticks. They took your chest, Frank said. They took the shell, I said. They did not take the attic. I used the key I had taped into my sweater hem and met Avery at my house after dark. Frank sat sentry in his car, a book open on his lap. My porch light camera blinked twice when Avery arrived. My office clock camera blinked once when my son had eaten the last of the lemon bars 2 weeks prior and told me the dishwasher was broken after he loaded it wrong. I watched the blinks later, frame by frame, while Avery lifted the attic hatch with a quiet grunt and reached up with the painter's pole my husband left behind for exactly this purpose. Still where you hit it, she said, bringing down the flat tin box we kept our final levers in. Inside were the papers that changed the state of a life. The power of attorney naming. Not my children, but Avery as my agent should I lose capacity. The letter revoking any prior authority, sealed and dated. The springing trust to which the house would belong the moment I elected it to be so. And my election signed last week in front of a traveling notary who came to my kitchen at dawn, one of Klein's good ones, and who filmed the signing with 2 cameras and a Bible open on my table because it soothed his own conscience as much as mine. Avery checked every seal, every initial. We record the deed election tomorrow, she said. First thing, we deliver notice to your children that you have placed the house into a trust with an independent trustee, me, and that any attempt to sell it without the trustee's consent will be treated as fraud. We copy the DA. We alert the title companies. We lay the tripwire. What about the recorder I put in the office box? We will use it if we have to, she said. But the clock starts when they learn the house is out of reach. That's when people show you who they are. They didn't disappoint. 3 days later, a realtor's sign appeared on my lawn without asking permission from the person who owns that lawn. Mara texted me a photo of it with a string of hearts, as if I'd be comforted by their choice of font. A man with a tape measure walked my rooms. The teapot camera watched his belt buckle kiss the edge of my sink. The office box camera heard an interesting sound. My daughter, on the phone, reading aloud a string of numbers that sounded a lot like my birth date, my social security, and my driver's license number. She was filling in a listing agreement while the refrigerator hummed witness. Avery moved with the speed of righteousness. She recorded the trust's claim to the house at the courthouse with a clerk who'd married my niece and remembered the pie I brought. She sent 2 letters, one to the title company the realtor always uses, a hint Klein passed me, and one to the agents who'd printed their faces in my yard. The letters were precise and patient. They said, "We see you. We see what you're trying to do. And if you keep trying, we will put your names in the paper for a reason you won't enjoy." That evening, Paul arrived at Sunny Heights with flowers and a pen. He didn't see Frank, who sat in a corner chair with a crossword in ears like sails. "Ma," Paul began, pacing my rug in steps too quick to be casual. "We ran into a snag. Some new deed showed up. Probably something Dad set up and you forgot. It's got Avery's name all over it. She's got you turned around." I looked at the flowers. "They'll be pretty for 2 days," I said. "Then they'll bend their necks." He stopped pacing. "You need to sign a revocation. We talked to a doctor." "What doctor?" Frank said without looking up from his puzzle. Paul turned, surprised. "Excuse me?" "I asked what doctor," Frank said, pencil steady in his knuckles, "and what his malpractice insurer includes in his premiums." Paul laughed. "Who is this?" "Someone who has sat in enough courtrooms to know the sound of a man holding a bad hand," Frank said. "Sit down, son." Paul didn't sit. He tried a different tone. "Ma, we're just trying to keep you safe." "People who try to keep me safe don't break into my attic," I said, and let him chew on the words. He blinked, went still. He'd always been bad at algebra. He couldn't follow the variables to the answer. He left without me signing anything. The next morning, restraining orders began their march through the courthouse. Avery filed for one. My children filed for another. They alleged confusion, vulnerability, a fall that hadn't happened. They found a doctor named Stiles who sells notes the way other men sell lawnmowers from their garage. Stiles wrote that I was not capable. He'd never met me. When pressed, he relied on family reports. A judge I didn't like granted my children an emergency hearing ex parte on a Thursday afternoon after lunch, an hour when even good judges grow soft. For 72 hours, I was frozen under the sentence of strangers. My children moved fast. They changed the locks on my house. They scheduled a sale for the following Friday. The listing went live. "Charming bungalow, motivated sellers," the text said. The price was low. They were trying to make it move before the ink in the courthouse dried. It was the midpoint of my story, and I let the fear breathe through me like winter air. Then I got warm. The emergency orders were temporary. The hearing that mattered would be public. People who lie in whispers often forget how loud a microphone is. That evening, Harold the mover called me from a number I didn't recognize. "Ma'am," he said, voice careful. "I shouldn't call, but I got something you might want." "Go on," I said, keeping my voice steady so he'd trust it. "After we moved your chest, I heard them in the kitchen. The young one said, 'She signs like a school teacher. Look at the curl.' Then the son said, 'I got her to practice earlier. We just traced that.' And the daughter-in-law laughed and said, 'The notary doesn't care.' I wasn't supposed to hear, but these ears have been trained on things for 60 years. I can come say that, under oath, if I must. You'll be paid for your time, I said. I was paid when you handed me that box of lemon bars last year, he said. I'll tell the truth for free. I slept that night and dreamed of my husband's hands on the cedar chest, planing the lid until it sat true. The hearing fell on a Monday. It rained. Courtrooms smell like old carpet when it rains, and they attract men who hate umbrellas. Frank sat behind me. Klein took a seat 2 rows up, his tie set like a soldier's chin. Harold wore his cleanest shirt, the collar too big for his neck since his wife died and no one measured him. Avery grew taller in front of me, the way good lawyers do when they stand where truth has a microphone. My children sat across, beautiful in the way thieves are on special days. Emily dabbed her eye with a clean tissue, the way actresses do when they've practiced. Mara squeezed her hand and whispered comfort like cinnamon on a bad pie. Paul stared at the judge with the open anger of a boy who never learned where to put his fists. Avery led with the fact that the doctor who had written me unfit had not examined me. She put Stiles on the stand and asked him one question. How much do you charge for letters like this? He looked at the judge, then at the ceiling, as if both contained friends. 500, he said. If I do a phone call, 750. Is there a code for that? Avery asked, holding up a chart of medical billing codes taller than a child. An ethics rule? A state guideline? Or is this just your price for 5 minutes of other people's stories? He squirmed. It's hard to look dignified when you're squirming in a brown suit. The judge shifted in her chair. Rain hit the windows like questions. Avery let Stiles demonstrate himself, then moved him aside like a pawn. Your Honor, she said, my client has a documented history of normal cognitive function. She has a financial plan, a trust, binding the property in question and witnesses to attempted coercion by children who stand to gain. They pretended guardianship when what they wanted was inventory. They speak of safety. What they mean is sale. She called Klein. He spoke in the careful voice of a man who has watched men drown in shallow water. We froze the accounts because of suspicious activity, he said. Attempted password changes from a device that wasn't hers. Requests for wire transfers that fit no pattern we've seen in her history. Avery put photos on the screen, one after another. The listing live on the internet. The notary's seal on a blank line. My signature. Perfect as a wedding day, but sitting on a paper I'd never seen. She called Harold. He walked to the stand like a man carrying a deep box. He told the court about the kitchen conversation and the curl in my signature. He tried to apologize for eavesdropping. Avery told him there's no apology in telling the truth. Then she did the thing that tilts a room. She called Frank. Judge Briggs, she said, smiling, with the calm of someone who knows the rules better than the referee. Please tell the court your experience with emergency guardianships. Frank put on a diffident face. The Frank B on his door wasn't a joke after all. Retired judges still know how a bench feels even in a folding chair. He spoke slowly and not like a friend. He spoke like a man who knows how men lie. He said the words every judge fears to hear from another. I caution the court against granting long-term authority on the strength of ex parte allegations and mercenary notes. My children looked small then. I think even they felt it. How a room changes when old power wakes. Avery closed with the recordings from my office. We had the lawful right to use them. The law permits homeowners to record in their own homes, and the judge let them play. The sound quality was imperfect, but truth doesn't need polish. Emily's voice reading my numbers, Mara laughing about notaries, Paul saying, "I got her signature right here." The judge did not thunder. She simply straightened her papers the way my husband used to set nails in a line. "Orders granted for Ms. Whitlow," she said, using my name like a gavel. "Emergency guardianship dissolved. All parties restrained from interfering with Ms. Whitlow's property and person. This matter is referred to the district attorney for potential charges involving fraud and elder abuse. Title companies will be notified." Paul stood so fast his chair squeaked a confession. "You can't do this. We're family." The judge raised an eyebrow. "That is why it hurts." They were not done. People who have led with greed seldom stop because a gavel told them to. The listing came down, but they pressed in other places. They went to my house and tried to gather what wasn't nailed down. They called my friends and told them I was sick. They canceled my newspaper and rewrote my mail. Mara called the utility company and tried to change the account name. They have energy, these children. They just don't use it wisely. Avery and I moved faster. We executed the final deed that made the house no longer mine alone, but the trust's. She became the trustee. I became irrevocably off limits to anyone who wanted to treat me as a piñata. We filed a civil suit for financial elder abuse. In my state, that means treble damages if a jury believes you were targeted because of your age. We added claims under the state's Unfair Trade Practices Act for the realtors who signed the listing like the house was a purse. We added the notary whose stamp had been too eager. I let Avery write. She knows how to thread a needle so it holds. Then I did something my husband would have admired. I found the old promissory notes my children had signed years ago when times were hard. To Paul, $10,000 at 2% to help him buy the engine lifts and get the county permit in place. To Emily, $8,000 at 0% to cover the last semester of graduate school when her assistantship fell through. We had drawn up simple notes at the kitchen table because my husband believed in paper. Everyone signed. Everyone paid for a while. Then life intruded and I let the notes sit because I love them and love forgives. But when someone points to your chair and says it belongs to you only as long as they say so, love gets a lawyer. I took the notes to Klein. He looked at me a long time over his glasses. "You sure?" he asked. Someone should have asked that before they hired a notary in a poker game, I said. "We'll pursue the elder abuse case, but I want a cleaner lever too, something that doesn't need a jury's heart." "You can assign the notes," he said slowly. "Sell them to a collections firm with a reputation. They'll pursue. They'll garnish wages if the court says so. It's ugly work." "I don't want my hands in it," I said. "I want it done correctly." Klein took the notes to a man he trusts more than I do. A month later, after a brief appearance in a different courtroom the children chose not to attend, both notes sat in the hands of a company that does nothing but collect old promises. They sent letters with deadly politeness, noting the default, offering a plan. The plan had numbers the children had never learned to love. Meanwhile, in the main suit, Avery took depositions. She sat across from the notary, Brad, whose stamp had put him on the list. He wore a polo shirt that would have looked fine on a better man. "Mr. Delaney," she said, "did you watch Ms. Whitlow sign this listing agreement?" He glanced at his lawyer, then at the ceiling, where men put their worst ideas. She wasn't in the room at the time," he said, "but her son assured me—" "Stop there," Avery said. "Assured you. Good. The statute for notaries in this state requires one of two things: personal appearance or acknowledgement by the signer in front of you. Which did you have?" He swallowed. "Neither." "9 years as a notary," she said, reading his commission term. "How many times did you notarize without presence?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The court reporter typed the silence like it mattered, because it does. Brad's lawyer cut a deal before we finished our sandwiches. He forfeited his commission. He wrote an affidavit about the realtor's office policy. Get the paper signed by anyone with a hand and a stamp. Ask forgiveness later when the commission clears. The realtor, confronted with the tape of my daughter reading my numbers like a bedtime story, turned to parchment. They offered to settle for the maximum allowed by their errors and omissions insurance, which is a dry way of saying their shame had a cap. We took it and left their names on the file for the DA to enjoy. The DA called me on a Wednesday, a woman with a voice like a winter coat. "Ms. Whitlow," she said, "do you want us to press charges?" I thought of holidays yet to come and storms that hadn't broken. I thought of grandchildren who did not ask to stand in someone else's shadow. "Do your job," I said. "And if the court offers a program for people who admit and repair, consider it. I'm not interested in cages. I'm interested in consequence." The DA nodded into the phone. You can hear those nods if you've lived long enough. When the first garnishment hit Paul's pay, the calls started. He left me 10 messages in one day. "Ma, this is cruel," he said, voice small for the first time since he'd learned to drive. "You could just let us fix it. We'll sell the house, right? We'll—" "The house," I said when I finally returned his call, "is no longer mine to sell. Law isn't a coat you can borrow when it rains and return when the sun's out. It's the wall. You didn't like the wall. You thought you could paint it and call it a door." He cried. It wasn't the right tears. Not yet. They were the tears of a man whose plans met a counterplan. I held my own voice steady, like the workbench my husband built so it wouldn't wobble when he planed. 2 weeks later, the collections firm seized the engine lifts and reached into his pay, like the law allows. The bank took one of the trucks. Paul's company limped into winter with a bad ankle. He laid off 2 men he should have kept. They weren't surprised. Men his age know when a boss has borrowed too much from tomorrow. Emily's wages weren't high. She worked at a nonprofit that sent glossy mailers with children's faces in spring. But the garnishment bit anyway. She called to say her kitchen remodel would have to wait. I told her I was proud of her for choosing charity. Then I reminded her that charity begins where theft ends. Mara stopped by my house one afternoon and stood on the sidewalk like a woman waiting for a bus. She didn't step on my property. I appreciated the respect or the fear, whichever drove her. "We were greedy," she said without preface. I was. I thought it was just housekeeping, paperwork, fixing what you didn't have the energy for. "You don't patch a roof by stealing the house," I said. She nodded. "We'll pay," she said. "We'll pay the notes. We'll leave you alone." "You'll do more," I said. "I'm changing my will, not because I hate you, but because I have learned what you are capable of when your appetites wake. The bulk will go to the scholarship fund my husband and I always talked about. It will be named after my mother, who taught math to kids no one thought could count. There will be a small bequest to the grandchild who brings me groceries without being asked. There will be nothing else." Mara's face tightened. She was younger than my children and still believed in miracles that arrive by mail. "You can't do that," she whispered. "I already did," I said, "and I recorded it." I went to the courthouse 3 times that spring. Once to watch the notary receive his fine and his suspension and his new job prospects. Once to sign a settlement that extracted money from the people who had turned houses into paper. And once to sit in the back row of a courtroom where my son pled to a lesser charge with a promise to pay and to complete a program for men who need to learn how to be ashamed without needing to be punished to learn it. He found me in the hall after. He looked smaller than a man in a sport coat should look. "You sold us," he said. "You sold our future." "No," I said gently. "You sold your future when you priced my house at a discount like you were liquidating a store after a fire. I sold the debt you owed me because I was tired of holding paper for people who were building bonfires, and I sold the idea that your inheritance was a promise. It never was. It was a hope attached to good behavior. You cut the rope." He reached for my hand the way little boys do when traffic is loud. I let him touch, because I was his mother before I was anyone's plaintiff. "I'm sorry," he said. The words landed like small birds. They weren't wounded, but they weren't ready to fly. I didn't say, "I forgive you." Forgiveness is a tool as sharp as any. You don't hand it over without checking the edge. "You can fix what you broke," I said. "You can come to Sunday dinner and bring your own bread. You can climb on my roof and check shingles when it storms. You can ask how I am without looking at my checkbook. If you do that for a year, I will consider revisiting the will. If you don't, I won't." He nodded. "1 year," he whispered. I put the porch swing back up that summer. I oiled the chains and listened to the creak that meant home. I replaced the front porch bulb with a camera bulb that would make any visiting thief blink at his own face. I put my husband's level back on the nail where it had hung before the move. I stood 3 steps into the living room and breathed slow. The house answered back in the silence of old wood that's been left to rest. Frank stopped by on his way from a doctor's appointment and sat with me while the cicadas sang their endless song. "You kept the house," he said. "I kept what mattered," I said. "You ruined them?" he asked. Not unkindly, just a man who likes clean outcomes. "I made them live with a cost," I said. "People spend better when they know the price." He chuckled. "You'd have been good on a jury." "I'm a mother," I said. "A mother is a jury that keeps no transcripts and never recesses. As summer thickened, the DA closed my file and moved on to worse storms. Avery sent me a letter that read like any letter a good lawyer writes when the work is done: precise, tired, and pleased. Klein invited me to the bank's potluck. He fried chicken with grease that smelled like churches. Harold stopped by once to touch the cedar chest and tell me his knees would never forgive me for making him climb my steps again. In September, I did the other work. I met with the Foundation for Public Schools and made the fund my husband and I had talked about when we were young and foolish and certain we'd have time. It will pay for 2 children a year to learn the math that makes money behave. The papers said words like remainder grant, irrevocable. I liked those words. They hold. When the letter announcing the fund went out, my daughter called. "I'm embarrassed," she said, "but I'm proud too." "Then for once you're holding 2 truths at the same time," I said. "It looks good on you." She asked if she could come on Sunday and bring pie. "Only if you baked it," I said. I did. "Then yes." We ate under the fig tree I planted when I turned 50, when the house felt taller because children were leaving instead of arriving. The pie wasn't perfect. The crust was tough. We ate it anyway. My granddaughter, Lily, helped me wash plates and did not ask for money. She looked at the wall where her grandfather's level hangs and said, "It's straight." "It is," I said. "It took some work." In October, a letter came from the collections firm saying the last installment on the assigned notes had posted. Paul had picked up extra shifts. Emily had moved to a smaller apartment. They had done the math without lying. I sat on the porch and watched a squirrel figure out a puzzle I'd made up for him with feeders and string. He was clever, but honest. He took the sunflower seed and left the plastic alone. I called Paul. "Come by," I said. He came in work boots he had finally learned to clean. He stood under the swing and looked at the porch floor he'd once tracked grease across. "I used to think this was just wood," he said. "It is," I said. "And it's home. Both are true." We went over the rules again, the kind that keep houses standing. He listened. He did not interrupt with new plans. He brought me a bag of groceries I hadn't asked for. Eggs, butter, onions, flour. The small things that mean a kitchen lives. He fixed the drip in the upstairs bath. He didn't ask for keys, but I gave him the spare and said, "Use it when it rains, not when it's convenient." November came, and with it the letters families write and the ones they don't. We ate together and didn't talk about the parts we could not agree on yet. You learn in a court that not every truth needs a microphone to matter. Sometimes it needs a sink of soapy water and 4 hands in it. On a cold morning in December, I pulled the cedar chest away from the wall and opened it. The lock stuck, then yielded like old grudges do when you bring the right oil. Inside were quilts, letters, and a photo of my husband at 30, standing in front of the house before it had a second coat of paint. He stared at the camera like it owed him something. I touched the paper where his cheek was once warm. "Look," I told him, "we don't belong to anyone. We belong to ourselves, to the things we promised when we were broke and quiet." I walked to the bank with a check for the foundation and shook Klein's hand hard enough to make him look at me like we'd won a small war. "You sold their future," he said softly, not judging. "No," I said again, mostly to remind myself. "I sold paper. They'll build the rest." He knew I was telling the truth. He knows how interest works. He knows how people do. Frank died in January. He liked telling people he was old and then proved it. I sat in the front pew at his funeral and listened to men tell the truth about a judge without making him bigger than he was. After, I went to Sunny Heights and asked the woman at the desk to take his nameplate down. We held it together for a moment, and then she handed it to me. It sits on my shelf now, the gavel cartoon a little sillier than he would have liked. It reminds me that a courtroom is a place, not a person. You can carry the rules home with you. The following spring, the realtor's sign across the street came up for a house that had not been stolen from anyone. I drank my tea on the swing and watched the agent's shiny car idle. He was young enough to believe every house will sell itself if he smiles hard enough. He did not see me, and that's fine. A grandmother on a swing doesn't need to be seen to be in charge. When Lily graduated high school, she handed me a program with her name spelled right. She's going to study accounting on a scholarship named for a woman she never met, my mother. There is symmetry in that. There's also justice, the slow kind that doesn't come with a news crew. Sometimes, when the cicadas are too loud and I feel the old weight in my chest, I think about the way Paul said, "You sold our future." He was wrong in the moment. But he wasn't wrong about the force he felt. I didn't just keep my house. I sold their habit of counting my days like coins in a jar. I priced it too high for them to afford. They can earn it back with sweat. That's the only currency that spends everywhere. I've learned something else. Revenge always offers you two menus. The first is blood. It's quick. It stains. It leaves you with a hungrier appetite by morning. The second is boundary. It's slower. It feeds you for years. And it costs the hungry something they can replace only by becoming different. I chose the second. I don't know if I'll live long enough to see whether it sticks. I do know the house sounds the way it did when it was new. Wood breathing, pipes settling, a porch that moves like it's alive. If anyone asks, I'll say it again so the words keep their sharpness. They moved me out to sell my home. I sold their future instead. And when I said sold, I meant I priced my dignity and made them pay retail.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.